Our energy grid is going through this massive, massive change. But what if the key to its future isn't some giant new power plant? What if it's actually something a whole lot closer to home? What if it's your house, your electric car, and a completely new way of trading power?
No, I'm serious. What if you could actually get paid for not using electricity at certain times? Or for, say, letting your EV charge a little later in the evening? This isn't some far-off sci-fi idea. It's a concept called energy flexibility. And believe me, it's about to change, well, pretty much everything.
So you might be asking, why is this flexibility suddenly such a big deal? Well, it's because as we add more and more solar and wind power, which is awesome, right? Our grid is facing a whole new kind of challenge. I mean, the sun doesn't always shine, the wind doesn't always blow, and that makes our power supply, well, dangerously unpredictable. It all boils down to this one fundamental rule of electricity. Supply must always equal demand, perfectly, every single second. If that balance breaks, even for a moment, you get blackouts. And with renewables being so up and down, keeping that perfect balance is harder than ever. The old, rigid system, it just can't keep up. And this is where you come in. Energy flexibility basically means that we, as customers, can adjust our power usage to help the grid out. By being flexible, we actually become this vital resource, a way to smooth out those wild, unpredictable peaks and valleys of renewable energy. And as you're about to see, that flexibility has real, actual monetary value. So how do you even create a market for something like flexibility? Well, some researchers have modeled it as a kind of game with three main players, and each one is trying to get the best possible outcome for themselves. So let's meet these players, shall we? Okay, this diagram kind of maps out the whole new energy marketplace. First, you've got the customers. That's you and me. Then there's the distribution system operator, or DSO for short. They're the ones who manage the local grid. And right in the middle, connecting them, is this new, really crucial player, the aggregator. The easiest way to think of the aggregator is like a team captain. Your individual flexibility, maybe from your smart thermostat or your EV, might be pretty small on its own. But the aggregator bundles it with thousands of others to create a really significant block of power that can actually be sold on the market. They're basically your agent in this new game. Now, the DSO, they're kind of like the referee and the league commissioner all rolled into one. Their only goal, their only job, is to keep the lights on for everybody. They honestly don't care who makes the most money as long as the grid itself stays stable and perfectly balanced. So how do all these players actually interact? Well, the research we're looking at proposes a really fascinating solution, a structured two-layer negotiation. It's basically a game with very specific rules, all designed to make sure everyone plays fair and, most importantly, the grid doesn't collapse. The whole negotiation is broken down into two parts. First up, you have the inner game. This is sort of the free market layer, where you and your aggregator hash out a price for your flexibility. Once you've struck a deal, it moves on to the outer game, and that's where the grid operator, the DSO, steps in to have the final say. Okay, let's just walk through it real quick. So in the inner game, you and your aggregator work out a deal. Then, in the outer game, the DSO takes a look at that deal to see how it's going to affect the grid. If it creates an imbalance, well, the DSO can step in and say, no deal, and the whole negotiation has to start all over again. This whole cycle just keeps repeating until the system reaches a state they call convergence. Now, that's just a fancy way of saying everyone is finally happy with the outcome, no single player can get a better deal by changing what they're doing, and this is the crucial part, the grid is perfectly balanced. Now, all of this sounds great in theory, right? But does it actually work in the real world? To find out, the researchers ran a bunch of simulations under 3 different scenarios. They basically changed the rules of the game to see what happens when certain players have more freedom to just act in their own self-interest. So these were the 3 setups. Scenario 1 was the baseline, with pretty strict rules for everyone. Then in Scenario 2, they gave customers total freedom to chase the absolute best price they could get. And in Scenario 3, they gave the grid operator, the DSO, way more freedom to control the whole market. And the results? They were pretty startling. The paper found, and I'm quoting here, that giving customers complete freedom had a very destructive effect on the grid operator's performance. Let me show you exactly what destructive looks like. This chart says it all. I mean, just look at the costs to the DSO, the guys whose job it is to keep the grid stable. In the baseline scenario, it's under 19 euros. Pretty good. But look at Scenario 2, when customers have total freedom. The cost just explodes to over 4,800 euros.
That's a staggering 256-fold increase. It's just mind-blowing.
So what on earth caused that huge cost jump? Well, this chart here shows us why. The blue line, that's scenario 2. Because every single customer was just chasing the absolute best price for themselves, it created total chaos. The DSO was forced to constantly buy these huge amounts of expensive last-minute power from the wider energy market, just to stop the lights from going out.
And all of this builds to the final, and I think most crucial takeaway from this research. It really reveals this fundamental tension at the very heart of our energy future. It's this trade-off between individual freedom and collective stability.
So here's the trade-off in a nutshell. When customers have more freedom, yeah, they and their aggregators make a lot more money. But that profit comes at an enormous cost to the grid operator. And that's a cost that, eventually, gets passed on to all of us through higher bills, or even worse, a really unstable system. Without the right rules, it just becomes a zero-sum game. So what's the bottom line here? First, modeling energy trading as a structured game is a really powerful way to manage the grid of the future. But second, and this is the most critical part, a completely free-for-all market with no rules can lead to absolute chaos. Total freedom for individual players can actually threaten the entire system. Which leaves us with the ultimate question, doesn't it? The technology to create these local energy markets, it already exists. The real challenge isn't a technical one anymore. It's about designing the market itself. How do we create a set of rules that encourages people to support the grid while also making sure the system is fair and profitable for everyone involved? That right there is the billion-dollar question we have to answer.